Think about last night. You can probably remember getting into bed. You can probably remember the last thing you looked at, a ceiling, a phone screen, the shape of the room in the dark, maybe the specific thought that was rolling around in your head, something about tomorrow, something someone said to you earlier that day. And then there's a gap. Not a blurry memory, not a vague one, an actual gap, a hard cut, the same way a film just ends and the next scene starts somewhere else entirely. One moment you're a person lying in bed, aware, thinking, definitely still you. The next moment it's morning, or it's the middle of the night and you're groggy and disoriented, and there is no footage in between. Not fuzzy footage. No footage. You didn't just forget the transition. As far as your memory is concerned, the transition never happened at all. Try, right now, to actually locate the moment it happened last night. Not the getting tired part. You can probably describe that in detail, the heavy eyelids, the sentence you were reading that stopped making sense. Try to find the actual seam, the last conscious thought before the first thought of the morning. Most people, when they genuinely try this, can't get within several minutes of it. There's no soft fade you can rewind into. There's just a wall, and your memory simply starts again on the other side of it. This happens to you every single night of your life, and it's easy to assume it's simply because you were unconscious, the same way you wouldn't remember what happened during a fainting spell. But that explanation, the one almost everyone defaults to, quietly falls apart the moment you look at it closely. Because falling asleep isn't like flipping a switch from on to off. Your brain doesn't go dark all at once. There's a stage in between wakefulness and real sleep where you're still processing the world, still having thoughts, sometimes even still capable of responding if someone says your name. You are, in a very real sense, still there. So if you're still there, still conscious enough to be having an experience, why does none of it get saved? The honest answer is that this isn't really a consciousness problem at all. It's a memory problem, and those are two very different kinds of failure that just happen to look identical from the outside. You can be awake enough to have an experience and still not lay down a single trace of it, the same way a security camera can be running, pointed directly at a room, and still capture nothing if nobody ever hits record. Somewhere in the last minutes before real sleep, your brain appears to switch off the recording function while the lights are technically still on. To understand where that switch actually happens, you need to know that falling asleep isn't one event, it's a stage, and it has a name. Sleep scientists call it N1, the first and lightest stage of non-REM sleep, and it functions as a kind of borderland between being awake and being properly asleep. If you've ever had the experience of jolting slightly and realizing you'd been drifting without quite noticing, or had someone insist you were snoring when you were completely certain you were still awake, that mismatch is almost always N1. It's a stage defined by exactly this kind of confusion, and it turns out researchers have struggled with the same confusion for decades. N1 is short, usually lasting only a handful of minutes, and it slips by so quickly and so quietly that, as one recent research team studying it put it, cognitive scientists have paid it comparatively little attention, leaving us genuinely in the dark about what's actually happening inside it. This confusion shows up constantly in sleep labs, not just in casual arguments about who is actually snoring. Researchers running overnight studies routinely wake volunteers up, check the EEG confirming they were, unambiguously, asleep by every physiological measure, and ask them what they were doing. A striking number insist they were still awake, sometimes fairly certain of it, occasionally even a little offended at the suggestion otherwise. This isn't people lying or misremembering after the fact. It's happening in real time, within seconds of being woken. Sleep researchers have a name for the broader pattern, sleep state misperception, and while it shows up most dramatically in people with insomnia, who can spend a genuinely surprising fraction of the night in N1 while remaining convinced they never slept at all, milder versions of it happen to essentially everyone. Which means the blackout you can't find any trace of the next morning isn't just erasing your memory of falling asleep. In the moment itself, it's already distorting your sense of whether you're even in the process at all. What makes N1 strange isn't only that your brain goes quiet during it. It's closer to the opposite. Researchers using EEG recordings have found that a key memory structure, the hippocampus, actually shows increased activity during the later part of N1, not decreased activity. The hippocampus is the part of your brain responsible for turning experience into memory in the first place. So on paper, More hippocampal activity should mean more remembering, not less. And yet N1 is exactly the stage most associated with the total blackout you experience every night. That contradiction is the actual heart of the mystery, and it only makes sense once you understand that your brain treats memory as a two-step process, not a single one. The first step is called encoding, which is your brain's way of briefly capturing an experience, tagging it as something that happened. The second step is consolidation, where that tagged, temporary trace gets stabilized into something that can actually be recalled later, a process that mostly happens during deeper stages of sleep, well after N1 has already come and gone. Encoding without consolidation is like a photo that gets taken but never saved to the camera's memory card. The moment technically got captured. It just never made it anywhere permanent. Which means the increased hippocampal activity researchers are seeing during N1 might not be failing to do its job. It might be doing exactly what it's built to do at that stage, tagging fragments, starting a process, without ever finishing it, because the rest of the pipeline required for a permanent memory simply isn't switched on yet. Here's where the research gets genuinely counterintuitive, and it comes from a study published in 2022 that measured this effect directly rather than just theorizing about it. Researchers had participants memorize the precise locations of a set of objects on a grid, then tested how well they remembered those locations after a 30-minute rest period. Some participants stayed fully awake during that rest. Some drifted into N1. Some slipped further into the deeper N2 stage. If deeper sleep were simply a stronger version of the same blackout, you'd expect the N2 group to forget the most, since they traveled furthest from wakefulness. That is not what the data showed. The group that briefly passed through N1 forgot significantly more than the group that reached N2, roughly 10% more items lost, and the researchers even found a physiological marker for it, a shift in the brain's alpha and theta wave activity that tracked directly with how much information got lost. Skimming the surface of sleep, it turns out, may be worse for memory than actually sinking into it. The stage that feels the most like still being awake is, by this measure, the stage where your ability to hold on to what's happening quietly gives out first. This also helps explain something else, something almost nobody notices about their own last moments before sleep, which is that they're rarely actually empty. Researchers studying N1 have found that this stage is filled with vivid, dreamlike mental content, a phenomenon with its own name, hypnagogia, distinct from ordinary dreaming because it happens right at the threshold rather than deep inside sleep. It can take strange forms, a single unfamiliar word appearing out of nowhere as though someone spoke it, a falling sensation, a flash of color or geometric pattern with no connection to anything you were thinking about moments earlier, a face that isn't quite anyone you know assembled out of features that are individually familiar. During hypnagogia, your mind frequently pulls in fragments of your actual day, faces, half-finished thoughts, images that don't quite connect logically, and blends them with things that have nothing to do with anything you actually experienced. Some researchers studying this stage have found that these fragments often draw from memories that share some loose thread of similarity, stitched together into something that feels, for a moment, like a coherent scene, the way a conversation from the afternoon might fuse with an unrelated childhood memory simply because both involved, say, a doorway or a particular tone of voice. You are, in other words, almost certainly having some kind of experience in those final minutes. It's just an experience your brain has already decided, in advance, not to keep. It's worth being honest here about how strange this actually is, because most of the analogies people reach for don't quite hold up. This isn't like a fainting spell, where your brain genuinely goes dark. It's closer to what happens under certain kinds of anesthesia, or during a genuine alcohol blackout, states where a person can walk, talk, respond, and even hold a conversation, while their hippocampus simply isn't recording any of it for later retrieval. Medicine actually relies on this exact gap on purpose. Sedatives commonly used for procedures like colonoscopies are specifically chosen because they leave a patient conscious enough to follow instructions, shift position, answer simple questions, while deliberately shutting down the hippocampus's ability to file any of it away. Patients often describe waking up afterward feeling like the procedure hasn't started yet, even though they were awake, responsive, and cooperating for the entire thing. Doctors and researchers sometimes describe this specific pattern memory failure at the edge of a state change rather than during the state itself, as a form of retrograde blank spot, a window where consciousness and memory briefly stop being the same thing. You don't need to lose awareness to lose the memory of that awareness. You just need the part of your brain responsible for filing it away to have already clocked out, even while the rest of you is still, technically, on shift. There's also a genuinely practical piece hiding inside all of this, which is that sleep researchers increasingly think N1 isn't just a memory failure. It might be doing something useful precisely because it's loosely connected rather than fully encoded. Some studies have found that spending even a single minute in N1 dramatically increases a person's odds of noticing a hidden pattern buried inside something they'd learned earlier, far more than staying awake or slipping into deeper sleep does. The same loose, half-formed blending that seems to erase your ordinary memories may also be the exact mechanism that lets your brain quietly rearrange them, hunting for connections a fully awake, fully logical mind would never have stumbled onto. The blackout and the creativity appear to be two symptoms of the same underlying event, a brief window where your mind is untethered just enough to lose the thread of what actually happened, and gain, in exchange, a strange kind of freedom to recombine it. It's also worth asking why a system would be built this way in the first place, rather than simply keeping the recording running until the lights fully went out. Nobody can run a controlled study on why this evolved, so anything here is speculation rather than settled fact, but a few researchers who study sleep architecture have floated a reasonable enough guess. A half-recorded memory may be worse than no memory at all, a fragment your brain would later have to sort through, unsure whether it was something that really happened, something you dreamed, or some blend of both. Shutting encoding off cleanly at a fixed point, rather than letting it sputter out gradually across an ambiguous stretch of minutes, may simply be a tidier way to draw the line between a day that's finished being recorded and a night that hasn't started producing anything worth keeping yet. A hard cut is confusing to notice from the inside. It may also be exactly what a system built to avoid confusion would produce. Which brings you back to tonight and to whatever the last few minutes before you fall asleep end up looking like. You'll almost certainly have some kind of experience in there, a stray thought, a half-formed image, a fragment of your day drifting past without asking permission. Your hippocampus will very likely be more active than it was minutes earlier, not less, quietly tagging pieces of an experience it has no intention of finishing the job on. And somewhere in that short, strange stretch of borrowed time between being fully awake and being properly asleep, the recording will simply stop, not because you went dark, but because some part of you, every single night of your life, makes the quiet decision that whatever happens next doesn't need to be kept. You will never catch it happening. That's not a failure on your part, and no amount of paying closer attention tonight will change the outcome, because the very system you'd need to use to notice the cutoff is the same system that's being switched off in the first place. It's a little like trying to watch yourself lose consciousness in a mirror. The observing part and the observed part are the same part, and once it stops, there's no version of you left behind to file the report. So tomorrow morning, when you wake up and the previous several hours are simply gone, missing, not recalled but genuinely never recorded, you can at least know what actually happened in that gap. Not nothing, just something your brain, on purpose, decided was never going to be yours to remember.